How's everybody doing? Are you sure? Is this clip 2015? Y'all that tired? Okay, maybe this is clip. Welcome one and all to our 5 o'clock session. My name is Tinson. I teach Africana Studies here at the college. We're gonna have a beautiful, action-packed, insightful, lively panel. And I want you to be ready for that. We're going to get started in just a second. I wanted to real quick announce we have our Institute for Transforming Social Justice. Maybe you've seen these cards out, but this is a new initiative that we're doing here at Hampshire College starting this summer. And we're hoping to, repeat it, grow it, develop it, tweak it as necessary. We're gonna be teaching around environmental justice, immigration, the carceral state, as well as art for social change. And so you can get more information by going to the Institute for Transforming Social Justice website. So I'm gonna introduce our speakers, and then at the end, a couple of things. Obviously, we wanna have a dialogue, wanna build with folks, wanna see where you're at with a lot of issues that are gonna be brought up here, and also some of the things that are going on in your neck of the woods in terms of struggles for justice, and just an old school cipher session in terms of really dialoguing, not having to just be a one-way street. And of course at the end we'll have an evaluation form. So that's all the nuts and bolts kind of stuff that we need to take care of. All right, to the business. To my left is Mwende Katwiwa, who is a program assistant at youth programs, volunteer coordinator, at Women with a Vision, New Orleans, as well as founding member and co-chair of the New Orleans chapter of the Black Youth Project 100. She is also the co-editor of winnovating.com and a spoken word artist on Team Slam New Orleans 2014-2015. Right. And go to Frequency Speaks for her full bio. Please welcome Mwende. To her left is Verónica Bayetti Flores, who has spent the last years of her life living and breathing reproductive justice. She has led national policy work on the intersection of immigrants' rights, healthcare access, young parenthood, policing, LGBTQ liberation. She is currently policy coordinator at Streetwise and Safe and co-president-elect of the Board of National Network of Abortion Funds. Please welcome Verónica. And last but not least is Raye Simpson, to her left, Executive Director of Sister Song, the National Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective, word up. She has organized extensively against civil and human rights violations, the prison industrial complex, and the systematic physical and emotional violence inflicted upon the minds, bodies, and spirits of African Americans, with an emphasis on African American women and the African American LGBT community in the South. Monica is a full circle doula trained by the International Center for Traditional Childbearing, and she is an artivist who uses her gifts of singing and spoken word in her activism to bring awareness to social justice issues around the world. Please join me in welcoming Raye Simpson. So that'll be the order of our presentation. So take some good notes, raise some good questions. Let's get ready to roll.
Ready? All right. Y'all hear me?
Yes.
All right, cool. So like he said, my name is Mwende. Y'all might recognize me from earlier when I was on stage by Frequency. But I'm here today in the capacity representing two organizations. The work that I do in my 9 to 5 with Women with a Vision, and then the movement building and organizing that I do with the Black Youth Project. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Black Youth Project 100, a little bit more of our history, our background, our organizing, pedagogy, and frameworks, and then leave it up to you guys to really ask the important questions about movement building and mobilizing within this Black Lives Matter movement. So Black Youth Project 100 actually came out of something called the Black Youth Project, and the Black Youth Project was a research body that was put together by Katwiwa up at the University of Chicago. She was doing all this research that looked at the political attitudes and feelings of Black youth specifically, asking them about different issues of social justice, right? So asking them about gay marriage, asking them about single motherhood, asking them about all these hot topic issues that tend to relate to Black youth, but Black youth are never actually asked about. So she started compiling all this research with Black youth across the country. Like I said, it's based out of the University of Chicago. And then in 2012, I think it had been going on for about half a decade, a little over half a decade. She convened together 100 different Black youth activists across the country. And BYP had always identified Black youth between the age of 18 and 35 years old. So they all got together in this one hotel room. Not one hotel room, one hotel. And they were having this convening, and it just happened to be in the middle of July, which is when the decision whether George Zimmerman would be convicted for the murder of Trayvon Martin came out. So they were together the night that that decision came out that he would not be convicted, and there was just such a so much heavy feelings and heavy emotions in that room, because it wasn't just, everyday people were sitting. There's 100 people who had dedicated their lives to mobilizing against police violence and mobilizing Black communities into better spaces for themselves. And they sat there together and they said, we can't just leave here, right? This is no longer just a gathering of 100 activists to have a discussion. There's a reason we were all called here together this weekend. We have to have something tangible that comes out of it. So what came out of it is the Black Youth Project 100, which is the activist wing of the Black Youth Project. So I want to show you guys a video that was put together by the original Black Youth Project 100. I am one of the 101 who came afterwards. But they were, again, from all over the country, 2 representatives. Is there no one in it?
There should be a guest.
Well, it's a great video. You'll watch it sometime. But basically, it just talks. It had all these activists. They came together and they put out a statement. The line that sticks out to me the most as an artist was, it said, "If the soil of the United States could speak, before saying a word, it would cough up our blood." And so that's where their starting point was. They said, we are at a moment here in American history that we've been at before, in different manifestations, right? So in different eras of American history, we've been at a place where Black lives don't matter, and it's been told to us and it's been shown to us by the way the state interacts with our children, our bodies, all of those things. And we are in that particular moment right now in this new generation, the millennial generation. So Black Youth Project 100 came about around the same time that the Black Lives Matter movement actually started. For those of you who remember, 2012 is actually when the whole Black Lives Matter hashtag started. And then they became an official organization after that, which a lot of people don't know. It's not just a hashtag, it's an actual organizing agency, and there's different chapters all over across America. So if you go back home and you're interested in joining, look up both Black Youth Project and the Black Lives Matter chapters. So Black Youth Project, we train Black youth, we mobilize them, and we organize them against different issues that we deem valuable. We came together to put together this document that we present to different places called the Agenda to Keep Us Safe, that has different points that we as Black youth came together and said, all right, these are the things that are disproportionately impacting us and harming us and leading to our increased criminalization. These are the things that need to be on the agenda. So it's called the Agenda to Keep Us Safe, and the thing that it highlights are increased community oversight and accountability, repealing crimes of youth, Mike Brown's Law, also known as body cameras on police, increased DOJ enforcement of existing civil rights laws, demilitarization of the police, and ending the war on drugs or marijuana decriminalization or legalization. The important thing for us with the Agenda to Keep Us Safe is that it's a working document. It's something that was created out of that national convening by a few of our members. And like I said, I'm the co-chair of the New Orleans chapter of the Black Youth Project. We're the first and only Southern chapter. So this document was actually created without us. And a lot of the things in here don't necessarily match up to some of the issues that we're facing in the South, which is something that we've seen trying to do organizing work in the South, is when people say that there's this national movement going on and all these national actions, what they're really talking about is the Northeast and the West Coast and maybe 1 or 2 places in the Midwest, and they're completely ignoring what's going on in the South. And so what actually ends up happening is the problems that we're talking about on this national level are actually exasperated in the South and ignored in the South. So when we're talking about the criminalization of Black youth, we're talking about Mike Brown, we're talking about Ezell Ford, we're not talking about folks like Victor White, who was a young Black man who was, from the moment he went out of his house, he really didn't stand a chance. He was criminalized immediately by the police, who saw him and stopped him and just decided to search him. They searched him, they found a small amount of drugs on him, small amount of marijuana, small amount of cocaine. They handcuffed him, put him in the back of a police car, and that was the last time anyone saw him alive. According to the police, he committed suicide in the back of their police car, even though he was handcuffed with his hands behind his back and the entry wound was in his chest, right? And so for us in the South, we're sitting here, we're like, how is it that this is not, if we're talking about police accountability, right, and we're talking about criminalization of Black people, how is this not one of the stories that's being told? Now, speaking to Victor White's father, I asked him that question without even blinking, without even thinking. He said, it's because we're in the South. And that got me thinking, as a movement builder, as an organizer, how do we make sure that we're including the most marginalized people when we're talking about movement building in marginalized spaces? Specifically with Black youth, we're talking about LGBTQ youth, we're talking specifically about trans women of color. In New Orleans, we had Penny Proud was recently murdered, so we want to uplift her and also uplift all of the trans women of color who, as we're in this moment talking about Black Lives Matter, the mainstream narrative is still ignoring and trying to erase the fact that the Black Lives Matter movement was founded specifically by two queer women, one immigrant to this country, and they made it when they said Black Lives Matter, meaning all Black Lives Matter, right? So whether you're queer, whether you're gender nonconforming, whether you're trans, whether you're poor, whether you're formerly incarcerated, whether you're currently on drugs, all of those things, those factors don't take away from your Blackness or take away from the need for us to fight for your freedom in this country. So that's where we're coming from as the Black Youth Project, where we're talking about movement building, mobilization, and organizing. I can tell you all a little bit more about the national, some of the work we've done in New Orleans, but I'm gonna pass it on so they can talk a little bit more about the intersections of reproductive justice and movement building.
Yeah. That was great. It was going to be hard to follow. Again, my name is Verónica, Bayetti, Flores, and I am here from Streetwise and Safe in New York City. Streetwise and Safe is an organization that does work on policing with LGBTQ youth of color, and more specifically, we do work to reduce the harms of the interactions that LGBTQ youth of color have with the police. I don't think that anybody that works at SAS believes that there is such a thing as like a safe interaction with the police, but we kind of come from like the interaction is not like traumatic or in any way horrible, so we come from kind of a harm reduction model in that sense. Can y'all hear me? I should, yeah, good, okay. So we try to reduce the harms of interactions with the police in a couple of main ways. One of them is through policy advocacy, right? We try to change policies that will, will fundamentally change the way that cops interact with LGBTQ youth of color. And the other piece is through Know Your Rights work, right? So we work very specifically with LGBTQ youth of color, do a lot of leadership development with specifically youth of color that have a lot of interactions with the police and that are criminalized. So what that means is youth of color who, are part of underground economies or are profiled as such, right? And we know already that LGBTQ youth of color are often profiled as being part of underground economies, but there's a lot of factors also that drive them there, right? So it's both and. And with these folks, we do a lot of work so folks can know their rights with interactions with the police, which doesn't mean that the cops are going to respect their rights, but it's just, again, one more tool and kind of like this arsenal of, what are the ways that we're going to keep each other safe, and knowing what your rights are with the police is one tool that we use with that. So as Mwende was speaking a little bit about, this national dialogue on policing and criminalization is really often a lot about cis men of color, cisgender men of color, and obviously that's a population that really experiences a lot of police violence, but we rarely hear about LGBT people, and we rarely hear about women as being the recipients of state violence, and specifically of police violence. And I think that has a lot to do with, with trans misogyny, with misogyny, with transphobia, homophobia, all of those things that make these cases not being uplifted. But criminalization plays a huge, huge role in the lives of LGBTQ people, and particularly youth of color, and people of color more generally. So LGBTQ people of color are policed in a lot of the same ways that people of color are more generally, right? So when we're talking about kind of like your mainstream narratives around profiling and all that stuff, you know, LGBTQ people are there, right? So LGBTQ people of color are part of the stop and frisk numbers in New York City, where they found out that 80% of the people that were stopped and frisked were either Black or Latino. LGBTQ POC are in those numbers, right? We're not visible there, but we're there. LGBTQ people of color are part of the 2 million people that the Obama administration has deported. Again, we're not disaggregated from those numbers, but we're there. LGBTQ people of color are racially profiled. We populate jails and prisons and detention centers. We're murdered by the police. We're affected by this consistently escalating enforcement of low-level violations, also known as kind of quality of life policing or broken windows policing. So all of these kind of larger conversations that we're hearing about, where we're not hearing about queer and trans folks specifically, it's important to lift up that folks are there, right? We are part of communities of color, and we're talking about policing communities of color, and alleviating the harms of policing in communities of color. LGBTQ people of color and communities of color are going to benefit from that. So there's that, but then there's also really specific ways that LGBTQ people of color are experiencing policing that are very much about a combination of race and sexual orientation or gender identity or expression, or how a police officer experiences all of those things, right? So one of the ways that we see this happening, you heard about this morning in the plenary, my colleague Mitchell was speaking about the use of condoms as evidence of prostitution-related crimes, right? So the way that this happens is that LGBTQ people of color, and particularly LGBTQ femme-presenting people of color and trans women of color, are often profiled as trading sex, right? Or they are trading sex, and then the New York City Police Department will stop somebody and then will say, often through an illegal search, right? It will say, empty out your pockets, empty out your purse. People don't know often that they have the right to refuse a search if there's no probable cause, right? So what they do is they'll open up their purse, they'll empty out their pockets, and that's where they'll find, you know, a condom or several condoms, and that can lead to harassment, questioning, and even arrest, right? So this is obviously a disaster, right? It carries this huge chilling effect on folks carrying condoms, and you know, people are resilient. People aren't stupid. They know how to keep each other safe, and people know that carrying condoms is gonna get them in trouble with the police. Some people know, right? Like the people that are affected by that, so they don't do it, right? It's a really, really huge problem. It's obviously a public health disaster, but it's also one tool that young people who are trading sex have to protect themselves, and that's being taken away. In New York City, it's particularly ironic because the city spends a lot of money on giving free condoms. You know, like one arm of the city, the Department of Health, spends a lot of money on giving people free condoms, and then the other arm of the city, the NYPD, criminalizes people for having those. Part of the advocacy to resist this, young people in New York have been very active to, calling this out, saying that this is actually, we cannot have condoms decriminalized. This is a tool that we use to stay safe, through that there's been some progress, both through the NYPD and through the state budget in New York State to get some crimes left, some crimes taken out, so that doesn't happen. But there's still a lot of loopholes, right? So we can't, when we're doing Know Your Rights training across the city, we can't tell people always ask, like how many condoms are illegal to carry, and the answer is that it's not illegal to carry condoms, right? But we still aren't able to say, like, you can carry as many condoms as they want, cops can't bother you for that, because they can. That's one huge policy area an organizing area that at Streetwise and Safe is a huge issue for LGBT youth of color. So another way that people experience policing that is really specific to LGBTQ folks of color and LGBTQ youth of color, we see things like sexual harassment that's very particular to perceived sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. We see sexual assault, especially when we're talking about people that are trading sex or are perceived as trading sex. Police officers feel that they can ask for sexual favors. People are routinely sexually assaulted, especially women are sexually assaulted at the hands of the police. We see things like gender searches, for example, right, where it's in New York City, this is illegal, but where the only purpose of a search is to determine your biological gender, right? So that the cops can know, what you are. So these are all kind of different ways that specifically LGBTQ people and people of color and youth are getting caught up in this criminal justice dragnet, which has a real impact on people's health, right? So to me, as a longtime reproductive justice activist, these issues seem really obviously reproductive justice related. This is terrorism, right? And this terrorism, I think, is related to the ways that bodies are dangerous, the status quo, right? Whether we're talking about transgressing normative gender, whether we're talking about making an active choice to end a pregnancy, whether we're talking about surviving in a world that's meant to kill you, that is your body is dangerous to the status quo, right? And the police is regulating that. So criminalizing people, and LGBTQ people of color in particular, is not a mistake, it's not a coincidence, it's part of this larger and kind of really carefully planned system. As it stands today, the avenues for legal and economically viable employment for queer and trans people of color and for immigrants also are really slim. So what we have is that, especially for folks who are all of those things at the same time, really limited access to employment. Whether we're talking about things like workplace discrimination protections on the federal level, a lack of legal documentation to work in this country, or a minimum wage that's just been inadequate for decades now. Because of all of these factors, the economic avenues for survival strategies available to queer and trans folks of color and immigrants and folks who are all of us at the same time are ones that are criminalized, right? We're talking about underground economies, selling drugs, trading sex. So what we're seeing is that the actual survival strategies that queer and trans people of color use are criminalized, our very survival is criminalized. So, and because of these same factors, LGBTQ youth are disproportionately homeless. In New York City, I think between 40 and 60% of homeless youth are LGBTQ identified. Again, this is not a mistake. For queer and trans undocumented immigrants, this kind of policing is extremely dangerous. It can be devastating, right? So getting caught up in the criminal justice dragnet can lead to detention, deportation, again, just because folks are trying to survive. One of the things that I wanted to lift up is that when I was on the streets and marching a lot at the end of last year, when all the non-indictments came out for Eric Garner's case and for other cases, we kept lifting up the names of people in New York City that had been murdered by the police, right? And so we kept saying these names: Amadou Diallo, Mohammed Bach, Kamani Gray, Ramarley Graham, and it hit me as these are the names of immigrants, right? These are the names of immigrants and the names of Black immigrants, right? And I think that that's a narrative that does not really get told very much, right? So if these people were queer, we don't know. That has not been lifted up, right? But I think that, again, that's just one more layer that needs to be talked about. And naming those intersections really matters. Remembering the names of women killed by the police matters, right? Jesse Hernandez was a queer youth who was killed by the police in Denver just 3 months ago. And there still has been no official investigation. The family's calling for a DOJ investigation. The Attorney General has not responded. The DA in Denver has not responded. A trans woman was killed by the cops a few weeks ago. A trans woman who was a sex worker was killed by the cops a few weeks ago, and the person that she was with was injured. The media reported it as two men dressed as women, busting into So I think that that's, again, something that we need to think about and we need to lift up, and that is about bodies being dangerous to the status quo. And I think that there's nothing that's more reproductive justice than that. It's about the danger of people's actually very bodies, people's very existence being a danger to the status quo, being a danger to the colonial project. So I don't want to just talk about kind of problems. I think that there are also a lot of solutions to this, right? And I think that LGBTQ youth of color know what they need to survive. They know what they need, and they know what the solutions are. The solutions are to things like ending the use of condoms as evidence of prostitution-related crimes, things like decriminalizing sex work, decriminalizing drugs altogether, working to pass comprehensive anti-profiling legislation that includes sexual orientation and gender identity, ending collaborations between police and immigration enforcement. Generally, as a person who's working on police reform stuff, and also as a person who is a police abolitionist, the way that I think about this work is to, how are we going to do policy work to reform a system that's meant to kill us? And the way that I approach that, and I think the way that a lot of the people that are doing this work with me approach it, is to generally pass legislation that takes power and resources away from the police and puts that power and resources in the hands of LGBTQ youth of color. Right? So these systems are inherently flawed, they're inherently homophobic, they're inherently racist and transphobic, and they're meant to kill us. And if we're gonna actually take serious steps that are legislative to challenge their power, we need to do things like take away power and resources, which is why I think we need to question things like body cameras, which is are really expensive. It's putting a lot of money that could be used in a lot of different ways in the hands of police departments. So I think that that's something that we always need to think about and question. I think that LGBTQ youth of color and LGBTQ people of color in general know what the problems are. We know what the solutions are. We know what we need. And all that we have to do is listen.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Now, this is the problem of going last, because you get wrapped up in what everybody else is saying, and then you forget what you got to talk about. Let me see if I can put this together. How do I do this?
Is it in here?
I think it's over here.
This one, yes.
Yep. Word. Is it going to come on?
Yeah, there you go.
Hot dog. That's the wrong slide, though. Let's go back to where we needed to be.
There you go.
Okay, so we're going to view slideshow. Boom. All right. That's why I need to stay there for a second. Everybody feeling all right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, my name is Monica Simpson. I guess y'all know that by now. And I'm leaving this image up because I want to read something to you all first. And this is from a song called Sorrow, Tears, and Blood. And it's by Fela Kuti, right? Fela Kuti, amazing artist, Afrobeat, amazingness. If you've never heard, then you definitely should, because you're going to get your life in on that. But I want to lift these words up while you all look at this image. And the words are, everybody run, run, run. Everybody scatter, scatter. Some people lost some bread. Someone nearly died. Someone just died. Police they come, army they come, confusion everywhere. 7 minutes later, all done cooled down, brother. Police done gone away, army done disappeared. Them leave sorrow, tears, and blood. Them regular trademark, them leave sorrow, tears, and blood. Their regular trademark. My people self, they fear too much. We fear for the living we no see. We fear for the air around us. We fear to fight for freedom. We fear to fight for liberty. We fear to fight for justice. We fear to fight for happiness. We always get reason to fear. We no want die. We no want go round. We no want quench. We no want go. I give one child, mama day for house. Papa day for house. I want build house. I done build house. No one quench. I want to enjoy. I want to go. So police gonna slap my face. You no go talk. Army man gonna whip your lash. You go their way like donkey. Our leaders they yab for nothing. South Africa them they own. Them leave sorrow, bloods and tears. Time they will go. Time no wait for nobody. Like choo choo choo. But police who they come. Army they come with confusion and style like this. For sorrow for tears. So, I'm going to take this out now because I'm going to go back to my notes. So the image that you all just saw is the album cover for the Roots album, Things Fall Apart. How many folks remember that?
Yes.
few folks in the room. Now, this album was really important to me. It was right when I was, heading into college, and like my analysis was shaping, like my eyes were opening to the world in a different way. And I was, I had just read the book Things Fall Apart, and then came Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks, and there it just started this downfall of all this information started to flow into my mind. And I was looking back at this album cover before this conference, and it made me think about what's happening in the world right now, and how I was just stuck on this album cover. Because we see this young woman running for her life, her mouth wide open. She is in fear for her life. Her brother behind her, they are running from these police-looking individuals. And it made me think about where we are in the world today, which is really sad, right? Because we have a world where so many folks are living in fear, scared to walk the streets, scared to, just live their everyday lives because of the violence, because of the state-based violence, because of police brutality, all of that that's really impacting our lives every single day. And I thought it was important to also lift up Fela Kuti. Again, I know our sister this morning reminded us of the Kenyan students that lost their lives, were murdered just a couple of weeks ago now, right? Just a week now. My God, everything is happening so fast. It feels like it's just piling on top of each other. And the other thing that's really important to mention, I wish my screen would go back to how I could actually read what's happening. Sorry, y'all. There we go. And we're also celebrating the decade for people of African descent. So I'm not sure if you all know that from like a human rights perspective, that we are now in this decade for people of African descent, where on an international stage, we are lifting up concerns. We're lifting up people who are African descent all across the world, not just here in the US, but all across the world. So all of these things are happening. We got Black Lives Matter. Everything is just like rolling on top of each other. And so what does all of this mean for the work that I do as a reproductive justice advocate, right? And last year, I know I talked a little bit about this morning, about the work that we do with Marissa Alexander. And it was right at that moment, whenever, because Marissa Alexander got lifted up because of Trayvon Martin, right? So when Trayvon Martin was murdered and the Standing Our Ground law got lifted up as something that was truly controversial, this Marissa Alexander's story got lifted back to the top. And we were able to understand that there was a woman behind bars because she was also trying to stand her ground. She was trying to protect herself and her family. And we lifted this issue up as a matter of reproductive justice because we saw it as a direct connection to our work. Her human right to parent her children was violated because of domestic violence. Her right to bodily autonomy was violated because of domestic violence. And the fact that we had this criminal justice system that wasn't really able to analyze and look at how gender and race and all of that plays into legislation like Stand Your Ground, she was in prison, right? Her children were being held by the man who was inflicting her, right? And hurting her and beating her. Like all of these things were happening, so we had to lift this up as a reproductive justice issue. And it was a really hard connection because people could understand it as being like this matter of violence against women. People could understand it as like, we need to talk about over-policing and criminalizing of communities. When we put those together, which I'm glad that we did, we had something that was a little bit new for a lot of the folks who were doing this work in our movement. So I really want my screen to go back to the way it was, and it's not doing that. Bring it back. I don't know. She's gonna fix it.
Sorry, I'll give you 1 second.
Yay! I can actually read my notes because I'm like, this is driving me insane. The power of technology. It's amazing, but it's also really, really, really.
My mom makes me do that for her all the time.
Oh my God. You gonna say your mom though?
She right there.
But you gonna say your mom though? That made me. But peace and blessings to you, Mom. I believe that. So we brought together RJ activists, we brought together folks who do work against domestic violence, we brought folks together who did work around the criminal justice system at the Standing Our Ground retreat in Florida last year to really talk about all the ways that this work intersects with each other, right? So we talked a lot about how, you know, I'm not sure if you all know, but the women in prison has increased by 646%. That sounds crazy. I'm not a statistician, right? But since between 1980 and 2010, which includes the rising number of children, right? Also being, you know, losing their mothers to the prison industrial complex. It's amazing that we were really not making that connection in a serious way about the fact that these children are being, you know, we're losing so many of our children because their mothers are also being wrapped up in this criminal justice system, and we're seeing this over-policing and over-criminalizing of mothers, like we saw with Marissa Alexander. And then when we moved to Tennessee just recently, right, there's this criminalization bill because of mothers dealing with substance abuse, right? We see Purvi Patel. We see all of these different cases now being lifted up where mothers are being overly criminalized and over-policed just because like, I mean, it's just really insane. It's really, really sad. So these are the issues that we're trying to lift up at Sister Song, but definitely from a reproductive justice standpoint that, you know, this war on mothers, as I've been calling it, is serious, right? And this intersection that we see with the criminal justice system is one that we have to start really paying attention to. We also, at that conference, we really talked about the fact that, you know, this criminal justice system really calling it out for what it is, which is like this modern day slavery that I feel like we're dealing with, right? It's like, you know, we have more folks, you know, going into prison and more folks being picked up and more folks being targeted, right? And I feel like we have to start calling it what it is. We have to start calling police brutality and the loss of all of these lives for what it is. And when we talk about all of these issues and what the root of all of this work is, we have to really talk about what white supremacy looks like in this country and how deep the roots of white supremacy run and how that is impacting what we see now and why there is a need for, you know, this organizing that we're doing under the Black Lives banner and all the work that we're all doing across all of our movements. But I also want to say that, you know, I'm 110% there for Black Lives Matter and work on our work locally, and I do all of this work. But this movement for Black liberation started way before Black Lives Matter too, right? And I'm grateful for Black Lives Matter because we have a way to really get folks involved and connected to this work now. But this work has been going on for a long, long time, right? And this has been an issue for a long, long time. This is not new for Black folks in this country. It's not new to us, right? We're just now seeing it on CNN and MSNBC and in living color in ways that we had never seen it like that before. And so it feels like, you know, history is just repeating itself, and like these modern day lynchings, as I'm calling them now, are just becoming like a matter, like they're becoming reality TV for us, right? And that's an issue that we're gonna have to start talking about. We have to continue the organizing that we're doing now around these issues. So for me, and I want to leave more space for you all to ask us questions. I really want this to be a dialogue and not me just talking at you, right? For me, I just feel like we have to address the real roots of this. And I know that there are other solutions, like legislation is important. We have to start thinking about who we're getting in office. We have to think about, you know, the laws and the bills that we want to get passed and ways that we can, create safeguards around ourselves. Yes. But we also have to have people at the same time addressing these deeper roots and also eradicating those things, which is why I wanted to lift up the fact that, you know, even from this international standpoint, like there are concerns around people of African descent in general around the world, right? Where there are issues happening, again, Kenya, you know, Nigerian girls going missing, right? Like this, it's happening all around the world, and it's an international issue, and we have to realize that we're part of a global family, and that all of these issues are directly linked to each other, and all of them have the same deeper root, which to me is this issue of white supremacy, and we have to start naming that and talking about that and not being scared to say that out loud. So I'm gonna stop there because again, I want to leave more space for us to have conversations, and y'all can ask me more questions about Marissa and all of that, but I feel like y'all kind of know the work that we did around that. I wanna leave space to ask more questions.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we want to open it up, and I really think that they deserve a better round of applause than that we just did. think that's important, and many of us in this room are doing similar things, but it takes a lot of courage to stay in these fights.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not for the weak at heart. And I mean that with all the love I can muster up, because this is work that puts a lot of people at risk in a lot of different ways. When you stand up publicly, you face reprisals, you face every effort to be derailed, every effort to be not taken seriously, etc. So it's just really important that we lift up all the people doing this kind of work, putting themselves on the line. Before we open it up, I wanted to give you a quote to think about from Joy James. Anybody know the name Joy James? She's a social theorist, and she's one of the godmothers of the anti-prison movement. From the intellectual activist standpoint, she teaches philosophy at Williams College. Look her work up. She's incredible. States of confinement, imprisoned intellectuals. She's just incredible. She's producing some new work too. She was in a conversation recently with another philosopher named George Yancey, who does a lot of work on critical race theory. She said that the implications of public servants and deputized vigilantes violating Black life with impunity are profound, especially for young Black people. We need to publicly debate whether it is just, moral, appropriate, or even safe and sane to believe in modern policing, given the fallibility, corruption, and danger present in the institution. Police agencies have a history of racial bias and violence that has been investigated and condemned by governments as well as civil and human rights organizations. Citizens are supposed to flee or fight criminals, not the police. But reality teaches you that in Black life, you need to be ever vigilant for both. And so that was from an article where she said that the current situation for Black activists is one that is locked in between grief and action. And so just picking up on some of the stories that you all shared in your own personal experiences, resisting state violence, I thought that Joy James's point is poignant, for this moment. So I want to open it up. Conversation, questions, comments.